Just before my question, a word of profound thanks to Catherine for the great revelation. I'd notionally been aware of Alice Milligan, but that was just wonderful, and thank you for that. And it leads me to my question, which is a possible second revelation. So I turn to Donal and maybe to Professor Laffan. A lot of us believe that Carson was or might have been a hurling man. Now, was he a hurling man or even a hurley man? And Trinity College might be a clue, I don't know.
Is the puck fada at Stormont, which is becoming an annual event, justified? In other words, the hurling competition in his name.
He was very briefly, it is said. Now, it doesn't appear, I think, in any of the biographies. I do remember coming across a reference to the fact that before hurling acquired, in the eyes of Trinity students and the Trinity establishment, nationalist connotations. We know that the nationalists were there from the very, very beginning, but it did, for a while, have, in many people's eyes, a non-political flavour. So it could be played in Trinity. There's no reason to think that he didn't. There's no firm evidence that he did, except stories that were told long afterwards. I simply don't know. I've come across the story. It may be true. It may be a gloss. Maybe he was playing some other game comparable to hurling. But it's a very nice story, and I wish it were true. And if it were, you could understand him wanting to conceal the facts in later years, because it wouldn't go down well to have himself associated with such a nationalist, subversive activity. So quite possibly, like you, I've seen the story. I just don't know. It could be true. It may not.
Donal?
Maybe it's too good to be true.
Well, I defer to the professor on every other matter he's discussed tonight, all around the world. But on this, and just so happens on this subject, I have a little bit more knowledge. I hope. He was a member of Trinity Hurley Club in the 1870s. There are a couple of photographs of that club which existed from about 1869 to 1883, but he's not in one of those. Hurley, as played by Trinity College and some of the Protestant schools in Dublin, it contained elements of what was popularly known as hurling, but as it was evolving, bear in mind this is a critical period in the late 19th century, nearly all of the major sporting organisations with which you're familiar were set up, and the games were codified in that late 19th century period. Indeed, it's only in 1862 that there's a total bifurcation between association football and rugby union. So, there's not as much clear straight lineage as you'd expect. So separating one sport from another isn't as simple as you'd imagine. However, by the early 1880s, hurley, as played in Trinity College, bore a closer resemblance to hockey than it did to hurling. And indeed, it seems that it was the view of nationalists such as Michael Cusack that hurley was, Carson, it does appear, was one of those hurley players. And obviously, hurling or hurley was played in Trinity College as early as 1810s, and I can't remember the man the Trinity student of the time who recorded hurling having been played in College Park in the 1810s, but it was, and it seems that Northern students were to the fore on it. But it seems that by 1882, nationalists such as Michael Cusack had come to the view that hurley was actually a gross distortion or contortion or whatever of the game that they had been familiar with in their youth, and he vowed to bring back the hurling. And indeed, it's interesting, whenever the GA was formed in 1884, around just in the months before that, Cusack set up the Dublin Metropolitan Hurling Club. There was the Dublin Hurling Club, which was chaired by Hugh Alexander Auchinleck, a Tyrone native who was an uncle of General Claude Auchinleck of Second World War fame. But so that Dublin Hurling Club was formed in 1882, and then the Metropolitan Hurling Club, which Cusack was also a member, and they sort of eclipsed hurley and set down hurling and codified rules for hurling for the first time So there were combined elements, but something which I can, in the post, which I found recently discovered, which is much more intriguing in the context of the obvious nationalist bent of the GA, is that there was the next revival of the first, whatever, revival of hurling per se in Trinity College in the early 1920s. Among the players was a J.G. McManaway, and J.G. McManaway was the son of the Church of Ireland Bishop of Clogher, and he became a clergyman in his own right, and was elected Unionist MP for
West Belfast.
Yeah, well, I think it was West Belfast, yes, right, and I think he also had a Stormont constituency role in Derry City or Londonderry, whatever. And but then in 1950 he was disqualified because he was a clergyman. But when he was campaigning in Belfast in the 1840s, one of his main campaigners was a young Ian Kyle Paisley, and so he was a very staunch Unionist, McManaway, but he had actually played hurling in Trinity College in the 1920s, whereas Carson sort of gets the benefit of the doubt because the GA hadn't declared its hand then, or wasn't around.